The purpose of this video is to show why ECC memory is not a waste of money, and to provide a detailed account of how much time you can waste when bit flips become a part of your everyday computing life. But actually, the previous sentence is a bit of a lie, because this video is really about more than that. I'll discuss various learnings that I had in the process of trying to image a hard drive of an old failing family computer. For example, is the process of diagnosing failing RAM very fast and easy? Nope. Should you use ddrescue or DD to image a failing hard drive? The answer depends on whether or not your memory is failing. So you've just imaged a drive with DD, but the hash checksum doesn't match. Pay attention to block copy sizes. Does the cheap DDR3 RAM that you can buy on eBay or Newegg work on old motherboards? Nope, but sometimes yes. Does an overheating computer have a higher chance of memory errors? I think it does. Speaking of wasting time, I wasted a huge amount of time on the analysis described in this video. This is probably the reason that you don't see too many articles or videos like this one. It's not because bit flips are rare, but rather because most people who encounter them are smart enough to declare that it was probably just a ghost in my program and reboot the machine instead of investigating the issue and then wasting even more time to write a blog post and a full video on the subject. My overall goal was to back up the data from an old family computer that was experiencing some problems. This was actually a computer that I personally put together back in the year 2008. That would make it over 14 years old. I found it fairly impressive that it was still running, despite the reports of occasional unexpected reboots. Backing up an old computer sounds like a simple task, right? Well, allow me to make it more complicated for you. Most people would probably just use the simplest backup approach of copying parts of the file system to an external flash drive. I wanted to approach things from a thorough data recovery perspective. Therefore, I decided to image the entire hard disk to guarantee a perfect preservation of all data. I decided to use ddrescue to image the drive, since I know that ddrescue maintains awareness of disk read errors. This is useful because it allows you to confirm if there are indeed problems reading from the drive and the extent of how bad the drive health is. ddrescue also attempts to carefully read the disk in a way that should preserve as much data as possible, even when the drive is mechanically failing. You can even go back and retry sectors that failed to read properly the first time. And so I changed the boot order of the machine, and then booted into a live install of Ubuntu 20 with an attached USB disk to write the image to. I installed ddrescue and ran it using the following command. Fortunately, ddrescue completed the imaging process without error and exited normally. Immediately after ddrescue finished, I decided to compute the MD5 checksum of the raw disk itself to compare it with the checksum of the image that I had just obtained. The resulting checksum value was the following. I made sure to use the sync command and properly unmount the external USB storage where my copied image was located. By using the sync command, I can ensure that any cached writes of the copied disk image are committed to my external hard drive before I try to unmount and remove it. On another much faster computer, I did a checksum to verify the saved disk image, and to my surprise, I got the following. That wasn't what I expected. I expected it to be this value. I started to wonder if I had done something wrong, or if maybe I had some incorrect assumptions about running the MD5 sum directly on the block device, or maybe I didn't quite understand what result the ddrescue command was supposed to produce. I decided to reboot the computer and again boot into the Ubuntu Live system. Throughout this process, I was careful to never mount or boot into the disk that I was imaging to avoid accidentally writing to it. This time, I decided to use the dd command to clone the drive. If you don't specify a block size to dd, it will use a value of 512 bytes. If you try this for yourself, you'll probably discover that the copy progress of DD is quite slow with small block sizes, like 512 bytes. Now, if you do a bit of Googling, you'll find that you can explicitly set the block size to a larger number to get a faster copy speed. Therefore, I chose a block size of 64K. After I finished making the image with DD, I ran another checksum on the block device to make sure that its MD5 sum hadn't changed. This was the same value that I got the first time I calculated the checksum of this block device. This was reassuring since it meant that the raw data on the disk had not changed even after rebooting the machine. Next, I ran an MD5 sum of the disk image that I had just created with DD. What? That's now 3 different hashes, and none of them match. Am I losing my mind? Then, I started to look a bit more closely at the file and device sizes. fdisk shows this, and lsblk shows this. So at least these two commands agree on the size of the drive in bytes. Now, how large are the disk images that I created? Okay, that explains why the hash of the image that was copied using DD is different. The DD'd image size is larger than the size of the block device. There's no way that the checksums would match. Okay, sure, it could if there was a hash collision, but this is not a video on cryptographically secure hashes. So, why is the image size wrong when creating the disk image using DD, but not with ddrescue? Well, here's the first interesting takeaway from this video. It has everything to do with the block size that is supplied to the DD command. The block size of the drive itself is 512 bytes, and its capacity is this many bytes. So this number divided by 512 is exactly this number of blocks. However, when running DD, I didn't use the default block size of 512 because that's too slow. Instead, I supplied a block size of 64K, or 1024 times 64 equals 65,536 bytes. If you calculate the size of the block device divided by 65,536, you get this number. Last time I checked, you can't perform 0.375 of a hard disk read, so it's reasonable to assume that this gets rounded up to one full hard disk read, or this number of block reads of size 65,536. But guess what? This number times 65,536 is this number, which is exactly the size of the image that I got with the DD command. I checked the contents of this extra data, and it simply contains zeros. The somewhat presumptuous conclusion that I will draw from this single experience is as follows. If the total size of the block device is not an integer multiple of the block size that you specified to DD, then you can expect to get zero padding on the end of your image. In this case, your important data from the drive is not lost, but the result could lead to confusing results if you ever try to copy the image back and find that it doesn't fit, or if you ever actually verify the checksums like I do. So, armed with this new information, let's pretend that the extra bytes on the drive image don't exist and recompute the hash. Success! That's exactly the hash value that I got from directly hashing the block device. Okay, that's progress. Now let's look into why the ddrescue one didn't produce the right hash value. It's probably another size or block padding issue, right? ddrescue seems to have produced an image that's exactly the right size, so extra padding at the end can't be the issue. Furthermore, the difference can't be due to an unexpected write or modification to the disk, because the disk image created with the dd command was taken later, and the MD5 sums were able to match. Maybe I've misunderstood something fundamental about how ddrescue works and how it constructs images? Let's see what the difference is between the two images using the CMP command. I expected to see some huge section changed in the ddrescue image, but instead I got the following. It's worth explaining the above output a bit to make sure it's clear. So if we focus on this line means that at the one based byte offset value shown here, in the image file hdimage ddrescue.image, the CMP command saw a byte that can be represented as octal value 107, hex value 0x47, or text value G. But in the other file, or the pipe in this case, it saw a byte with octal number 307, hex value 0xC7, represented as the non-ASCII character M-G. To be even more clear, here's a simple example of using the CMP command to compare the bytes A and B, and the corresponding output from this command is shown here. Now that you know how to read the output from this command, do you notice something common with the differences in these bytes? Let's put this output into a file called differences.txt and try to format the output a bit differently with this Python script. After putting this script into the file parse_differences.py and running it like this, the output can be seen here. Pay special attention to the column byte number 1 XOR byte number 2. This column shows the bitwise exclusive OR between each byte that had a difference in the ddrescued image when compared against the image that was created with DD. The exclusive OR shows us a 1 whenever the bits have flipped. This makes it incredibly obvious that the only difference in the ddrescued image is that these 14 individual bits have flipped to be a 1 when they were supposed to be 0. This is why the MD5 checksum of the ddrescued image does not match the MD5 sum of the raw block device or the one created using DD. At this point, it's reasonable to suspect memory errors. Let's reboot into Memtest 86 and test out the memory. Yep, that's a memory error, but we're not done yet. We can go even deeper. The failing address in the image is this, or this value in decimal. The error bits that were reported by Memtest were this value. This value represents a mask that shows exactly which bits of memory at this address contributed to the error. Since this machine uses Little Endian, this address points to the byte on the rightmost end of the mask. If we split up this machine word into bytes, we get byte number 3 having value 0, byte number 2 having value 0x80, byte number 1 having value 0, and byte number 0 having value 0. Counting upward one byte at a time, the exact byte where the single bit error is located is in byte number 2. Therefore, the exact address of the individual byte where the error occurred was at this memory address plus 2, which is this value, or this value in decimal. Now, if we think back to our list of byte offsets from the output of the CMP command, we can look for even more patterns, even though these might seem like random numbers at first. Remember, these numbers are byte offsets that tell us the number of bytes into the hard drive image that the CMP command found a difference. These are not addresses in RAM, so they won't have anything to do with the address of our failing bit in memory. Or do they? The word on the street is that information is read into a computer's memory in chunks called pages. There's also a lot of talk about how these so-called pages are typically 4K, or 4096 bytes in size. Let's modify our previous Python script to show us the byte offset into the file modulo 4096 with a -1 adjustment to account for the 1-based indexing. And the output is now this. Pay attention to the first column. And just like that, these seemingly random image file byte offsets contain an incredibly obvious pattern. They're all congruent to 714 modulo 4096. And remember that exact address of the failing memory byte? Go ahead and calculate what it's congruent to modulo 4096. I dare you. It's 714. Now, let's do even more analysis by piping the output into this awk command. Hey wait, is that a... Oh my... At this point, we've confirmed that there are in fact bit flips occurring in memory. And furthermore, we can make a precise association between the individual bit flips that were reported by Memtest in hardware and the bit flips that we saw in the ddrescue software as it imaged the hard drive. This association comes from the fact that all the failing addresses were both congruent to 714 modulo 4096. The value 714 modulo 4096 in relation to the hardware itself is not significant, but the fact that we also saw this exact same value, 714, through the software activity of ddrescue seems like more than a coincidence. It's not unreasonable to conclude that the ddrescue program requested heap memory pages from the operating system that were 4096 bytes in size as temporary storage data for the data that was copied during the imaging process of the hard drive. By chance, some of these memory pages just happened to include the bad physical memory address noted above. This caused the bit flips to occur, corrupting the resulting image. So, if we got 14 bit flips when creating the image with ddrescue, how come we got 0 bit flips when copying with the dd command? That's a good question, and one that I don't have a great answer for, but I would speculate that it has something to do with how ddrescue uses heap memory internally. The dd command is a much simpler tool to do block copies of information, without trying to maintain data structures to reconstruct and retrieve failed sectors in the same way that ddrescue does. It's likely down to the fact that the dd command simply uses less heap memory, or accesses it in a different pattern compared to the way that the ddrescue command does. Whatever the reason is for the difference in the behavior between dd and ddrescue, we could argue that you might prefer to use one or the other tool to image a hard drive depending on the circumstances. In cases where you suspect that a hard drive is failing, you would prefer to image the drive using ddrescue. However, in cases where you suspect that the memory is failing, then you might prefer to use the dd command. If you suspect that either could be failing, you would image the hard drive using both methods, and then verify by computing the hash of all three: the raw block device, the dd-based image, and the ddrescue-based image. Okay, so at this point, I was sure that there were definitely memory errors in this computer. However, I already have a fully intact and verifiably correct image of the hard drive, despite the failing memory, so we're done, right? Nope. It's time to replace the memory and then verify that the hardware issue has been fixed. One of the first changes that I made to the hardware was to replace the power supply with a brand new one. Power supplies contain components, like electrolytic capacitors, that can degrade over time. I didn't actually do any kind of fancy analysis to evaluate whether the power supply really did need replacing. In fact, I don't really have the equipment that you'd need to do such a test, but I felt that it was safe to assume that after almost 15 years of operation, a replacement couldn't hurt. Replacing the power supply might seem like a strange place to start debugging a problem with the computer's memory, but if there really was a problem with the power supply, then you can end up with all sorts of extremely strange and hard to debug problems with the rest of your hardware and software. When the power supply functions correctly, it should convert your 120 volt or 240 volt AC into well-filtered 3.3 volt, 5 volt, or 12 volt DC. However, if the power supply starts to fail, these DC voltages could be too high, too low, or experience ripple effects. Many experienced computer users have heard of the idea that bit flips are extremely rare occurrences that are almost always caused by cosmic rays from space. In my experience, bit flips are a much more frequent occurrence that can typically be attributed to a persistent hardware issue. With the power supply replaced, my weeks-long saga of troubleshooting the memory began. First, I started with a test to confirm that I still had memory failures even after replacing the power supply. Indeed, Memtest was still identifying failures after just a few minutes. For this test, I still had all 4 memory slots populated with a 1 GB stick each. I should also mention that this computer had multiple failed case fans, so it was running hotter than normal. I decided to try and use a process of elimination to identify whether there was a single stick, or possibly multiple sticks, that were the root cause of the problem. I ran another test with only a single stick of RAM in the slot closest to the CPU. After 40 minutes, it had 0 errors, so I concluded that this stick might be okay. Then, to be extra thorough, I put all 4 sticks of RAM back in and ran Memtest again. A common cause of memory errors is RAM that isn't making a good connection with the slots on the motherboard. Sometimes, simply taking the RAM out and putting it back in will fix the issue. This wasn't the case here because more errors appeared within a few minutes. Based on the addresses where the memory errors occurred, I started to suspect that there might actually be 2 sticks of RAM that were bad. I ran another test where I kept only these 2 sticks in the motherboard. This time, the test ran for 1 hour and 22 minutes without reporting any errors. At this point, I started to suspect that maybe it wasn't even the RAM that was bad, but perhaps the RAM slots, or the motherboard, or the CPU itself that was bad. I ran another test where I put the 2 remaining sticks of RAM into the exact same slots that I had just seen working without errors in the previous test. This time I got errors again, so I had the errors down to 2 sticks of RAM in the 2 slots that were closest to the CPU. I first tested again with only the first stick of RAM in the slot closest to the CPU. This time it ran for 1 hour and 46 minutes with no errors. From this, I concluded that the culprit probably wasn't this stick or the slot closest to the CPU. Next, I tested the second of the 2 sticks in the second slot away from the CPU. I did get an error just before the 1 hour mark, so I had localized the error down to 1 stick of RAM and at least one of the slots. In order to try and rule out a problem with the RAM slot itself, I did another test with this exact same stick in the slot closest to the CPU, and got another failure at almost the 3 hour mark. I found it a bit odd that it took a lot longer to trigger errors in this slot, so I did another identical test of this stick of RAM in the same slot while the computer was still warm. Again, it took about 3 hours for the first error to pop up. In order to completely rule out any involvement of the second RAM slot itself, I decided to do even more testing in this slot with one of the other sticks of RAM that I hadn't yet observed any failures on. This test ran for over 10 hours and did not result in any error. At this point, I concluded that I had identified at least one bad stick of RAM, since it failed with the same error mask in multiple slots. I put a mark on this stick to identify it as stick number 1. Furthermore, I concluded that the motherboard itself, or the CPU, was not likely to be the root cause of the failures. I also concluded that the stick that ran for over 10 hours without error was probably okay. I then marked this stick to identify it as number 2. Next, I took one of the remaining untested sticks and did the same test in the second slot away from the CPU. This stick ran for over 11 hours without any errors. I identified this stick as number 3. Finally, I tested the last stick, number 4, for 12 hours and 47 minutes, and did not see any errors. So far, I've identified number 1 as bad, and number 2, number 3, and number 4 as likely good. So, the next thing to do is put these so-called good sticks together, and test them out because hopefully they should work, right? Nope. One failure detected after only an hour. I wasn't completely sure how the RAM addresses mapped to the actual RAM slots. and I had a hunch that there might be an issue with the stick in the third slot away from the CPU. I decided to take out all but this stick in the third slot and do another test. I also hadn't tested in this slot much before, so I figured it was worth a shot. I was hoping to get lucky and catch a failure in this stick, but after an hour there were still no errors on this stick. At this point it was clear that testing individual sticks one at a time wouldn't quickly reveal failures, so I decided to move to an approach of testing more than one stick at once. I would also start being more careful in tracking the stick and slot numbers and logging the exact failure addresses. So for the first test, I put the sticks in this order and got my first failure before the 2-hour mark. For the second test, the sticks had this order, and it had failures by the 32-minute mark. For the third test, the sticks had this order, and I noted the first failure at the 1 hour 49-minute mark. For the fourth test, the sticks had this order, and I noted the first failure at the 36-minute mark. As I started to review the data from all 4 tests, I realized that this was probably the worst possible result. From these test results, you can see that test number 1 and test number 4 both have a failure at the exact same address with the exact same bit mask. If you look at the RAM slot orderings for these 2 tests, you can see that the only commonality between them is the position of stick number 2. If you assume that the number 2 stick, or the slot at its position, is the only bad stick among these 3, then you would expect to also see a clear pattern between the failures in test number 2 and test number 3. The number 2 stick is in the same location between test number 2 and test number 3, but clearly the failures between these 2 tests show different locations in different megabytes. From this, I concluded the following. The remaining hardware error in the last 3 sticks of RAM cannot be due to a single bad stick of RAM. It must either be due to multiple bad sticks of RAM, or some sort of less obvious common mode problem. There may be an issue with the motherboard's ability to refresh the RAM states when more than a couple RAM sticks are present. Perhaps there's a leaking capacitor somewhere on the motherboard, or maybe the presence of multiple RAM sticks causes an intolerably long increase in the time between refreshes. I also haven't given much consideration towards the selection of RAM timings, voltages, and frequencies. So far, I've just relied on BIOS to automatically select the right default values, and it's beyond my capabilities to select better values. At this point, I felt that I had done just about everything that I could to isolate which sticks of RAM were bad, and that it was probably worth giving up on all 4 of the original sticks of RAM. For the next bit of hardware improvement, I decided to replace all the thermal paste and install the new CPU fan, and replace all the case fans. With all the fans replaced, I decided to start up Memtest again with these 3 sticks and see if the cooler temperature had much influence on the rate at which errors appeared. I let this test run for almost 18 hours, and it only recorded 1 error during that time. This is contrasted with the exact same test that I did before, where I could usually get multiple errors within the first couple hours. From this, I conclude that letting your computer get very hot is one very likely cause of increased memory errors. Back when I had seen the first Memtest error, I decided to go ahead and order some new RAM from China, and since that finally arrived, I decided to test it out too. It cost me $30 including shipping to get these 4 brand new sticks direct from China. I started out by putting all 4 sticks of RAM in and tried to boot it up. Unfortunately, the motherboard didn't like this RAM, and I only got post-beeping codes for memory issues. Then I removed 3 of the sticks so that only 1 of them remained, and tried again. It still gave me beeping codes for memory issues. Around this time, I started doing more research and discovered that there is another important variable to consider when buying RAM, and that is RAM density. Apparently, older motherboards cannot handle newer high-density RAM. This is a problem because most of the cheap RAM that you find online does not give any indication of what its density is. So there's no way to know if it will actually work until you buy it and put it in the motherboard. I decided to give it another shot, so I bought even more cheap RAM off of eBay. This here is supposed to be 2 sticks of 2 GB each. From the label on the RAM, it looks like this might actually be 4 GB sticks, but the description assured me that they were indeed 2 GB sticks, which are supposed to work in this motherboard. For the record, this is my model of motherboard. I installed the RAM and found that it also didn't work. I I tried a few times with only one stick, and I also rearranged the RAM in the slots a couple times, but this only produced more post-error codes. Naturally, the next step was to buy even more RAM off of eBay. I believe these ones were actually used sticks. They're 1 GB each, and they appear to be a mixed lot. For this set, it looks like there's a high probability that the RAM timings, voltage, and density may all be different and possibly incompatible. I decided to start by not paying any attention to this detail and just put all 3 of them in at once and see what happens. Clearly, it wasn't working with all 3 sticks of RAM together, so I tested out each stick individually, and to my surprise, all 3 of these sticks work. After looking a bit more carefully at the voltages and timings of these sticks of RAM, there are 2 of them that appear to be fairly similar, so I decided to try installing them both together. Fortunately, this did manage to boot up successfully, and I was able to get into Memtest. I decided to let Memtest run with these sticks for 50 hours, and after 69 passes, with 0 failures, I think it's time to declare this a success. This 2 GB of memory is a lot less than the 8 GB that I originally wanted to install, but given how hard it is to find old RAM that actually works, I'll have to declare this as good enough. So, what kind of conclusions can we draw from the experiences that I've described in this video? There are a lot of mini lessons and learnings, but the most significant idea that I want to impart to the viewer is the scale of how much time I wasted debugging this. With cheap consumer non-ECC memory, your bits can flip here and there, and you'll have no idea. The first indication that I had that there was even a problem was a silently corrupted hard drive image. To even detect this, I needed the patience and discipline to verify the checksum on a 500 GB file multiple times. Imagine how much more time I could have wasted if I didn't bother to verify the checksum and made use of an important business document that contained one of the 14-bit flips. Now, some of you might think it's a bit melodramatic to even consider it a big deal when only 14 bits per 500 GB of data are corrupted. But that's really what defines the difference between a user that needs ECC memory and a casual user who doesn't. Some people need computers to produce exactly the correct results all the time, and some people are okay with just rebooting the machine when it misbehaves, and then blaming the problem on ghosts. Having said this, the performance and cost advantage of using consumer-grade non-ECC memory compared to ECC memory is getting smaller and smaller every year. Hopefully one of these days, memory and CPU manufacturers will finally bite the bullet and declare, "We are permanently discontinuing non-ECC memory and CPU production forever. Moving forward, all consumer-grade memory and CPUs will use error correction." Once this happens, we can finally stop having conversations about this topic, and people like me will no longer need to make videos like this one.